We're back, guys.
And better than ever.
Yeah.
That's right. You might even say we're stronger than before. Oh, Zeo. Hello and welcome. This is Mr. Fusion. In case you're new here, one of the things I have been doing on my channel is an episode-by-episode survey comparing Super Sentai to its Power Rangers adaptation and deciding which episode did it better. For the past few years, I did a 30-episode video series called The All-New Mighty Morphin Zyurangers, reliving the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers I knew as a child before I grew out of it. But the Power Rangers as you have known them are gone forever. Last year I made up for the tokusatsu deficiency in my release diet by doing a 6-part review series on the live-action Sailor Moon, which, frankly, is the best Sentai series I've ever seen. But I also haven't seen all that many. I missed doing this. It was fun. So this time I'm back to cover 2 series I've never seen before, or at least had never seen before prepping for this series. It's Power Rangers Zeo and its inspiration, Chouriki Sentai Ohranger, the latter of which turns 30 this year. Hey, perfect timing. I'm looking forward to this matchup. Zeo is still close enough to my childhood memories that I know the characters. And by skipping ahead 2 years, Power Rangers has already gotten markedly better in its production skills. Frankly, in our last series, Zyuranger absolutely dominated, winning by a margin of about 3-1. I think this is going to be a much closer race, and that excites me. So let's get to it. Where to even begin? I guess in case you're a complete newbie, let's start from the very basics. Super Sentai and Power Rangers are both long-running franchises about teams of heroes in color-coded outfits, fighting against evil forces by using martial arts, giant robots, and other gadgets. The concept originated in Super Sentai, but in 1993, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers began, combining footage and concepts from Super Sentai with original footage of their own actors to give the illusion of a wholly American show. For Mighty Morphin Power Rangers' first year, it adapted Chouriki Sentai Ohranger, a dinosaur-themed Sentai. But Super Sentai reinvents itself every year with a new premise, aesthetic, and characters. Power Rangers did not initially want to do that, so for its second and third seasons, it pulled a Robotech and basically did a mashup of 3 different Sentai series at once, combining aesthetic elements with very little Sentai footage. That's why I skipped over those. But for Power Rangers Zeo, Saban, the production company, decided to at least change over the aesthetic and villains to Chouriki Sentai Ohranger while still keeping the characters and setting from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 3. Both series are about a team of warriors fighting back against invasion from a machine empire. Many of the plots of Ohranger are adapted fairly straightforwardly into Power Rangers Zeo. But not today. And that's because, as I basically just laid out, the first episodes of these respective series are serving 2 very different masters. Ohranger is building a premise from scratch, introducing characters and concepts. Power Rangers Zeo is also doing a lot of establishing, but in addition, it's resolving and discarding plot threads from the previous season. That's because Mighty Morphin Power Rangers did not have a conclusive finale. It ended like this. Yeah, it's quite a cliffhanger. That means there are a lot of pieces to pick up. Without getting too into the weeds here, as it's not really the point of this video series, the lead into Power Rangers Zeo saw the characters' powers being destroyed and all the Power Rangers but Billy stuck as children. However, another potential power source, the Zeo Crystal, was scattered through time and space, so a mini-arc saw the Child Rangers visit their cultural heritage to find the individual pieces of the Zeo Crystal. Meanwhile, Billy stuck around to provide support to the Alien Rangers, a group of Power Rangers from another planet, which allowed the show to burn off some Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger footage they otherwise couldn't use. The crystal was found, time was restored, and the Alien Rangers went home, just in time for the bad guys to blow up the command center and seemingly Alpha and Zordon with it. That is the immediate context coming into a Zeo beginning. The Rangers spend the entire first episode exploring and ultimately finding Zordon and Alpha's new power chamber. That's their entire role here, because that's the immediate conflict they are facing. It's not until the second episode they're even made aware of the threat of the Machine Empire. It's actually the outgoing villains, Rita Repulsa and Lord Zed, who get to field the introduction to the new villains, as said new villains attack them and drive them away. There's very little Sentai footage in this two-parter. I think there might be about as much Dairanger footage in here as Ohranger footage. I'm really only comparing them because this is still at least narratively an adaptation. Thankfully, that caveat won't hold true as we carry forward. But for now, most of the Ohranger footage used is hit with a day for night filter and recontextualized to the Machine Empire firing on Rita and Zed. On top of that, the show also has to set up Bulk and Skull's shtick for the season. Two of the previous bad guys, Rito and Goldar, have lost their memory, and Bulk and Skull agree to house them, but only if they become their servants. It's a really weird opening because there is so much going on, but ultimately not all that much going on. The old villains get shot at for a very long time, the Rangers are only on screen for about 7 minutes, and their contribution amounts to running up a hill, picking up a crystal that sings the theme song, falling in a pit, walking down a hall, and entering a door from a 1990s CD-ROM adventure game. But it definitely works to draw out the suspense. It's a very different opening where the villains are the real stars of the show. But that's kind of refreshing. Frankly, Rita and Zed are probably the most interesting characters at this point. In an attempt to manufacture some drama, Power Rangers ends its first episode by raising the possibility that Zordon might have actually died.
Is he?
Oh, I am so sorry, Power Rangers.
That, of course, is revealed in the next episode to be the dirty, dirty fake-out that it clearly is.
Is he?
Ay, don't even think it.
Then don't imply it, you stupid robot! Ohranger's first episode is far more traditional, other than the fact that it takes place in the far-off future of 1999. I've read that apparently that's later retconned, probably because of the later team-up with Kaku Ranger, but I don't know if I believe that. I distinctly remember a computer display from near the end of the series that still lists the date as being in the year 1999. Whatever, it's not all that important. Rather than the villains taking their aggression out on a handful of Renaissance Fair performers, Ohranger opens with a full-on invasion of Earth. Cities are toppled. According to the dialogue, the Baranoia Empire has staged similar attacks all over the world. Now, only the secret project of the UAOH can save the world. Unfortunately, 4 of the candidates for the mission, all fighter pilots, have been attacked by Baranoia's forces and are being hunted through the countryside. It's up to Captain Goro to find them, save them, and demonstrate the power of Chouriki as O-Red, the leader of Ohranger. Unlike Zeo, this is a lot more focused. There aren't multiple plots to be dealt with. It's just the one. Bad guys attack, and heroes try to survive. Aside from the stock Baranoia shots, this footage can't be used in Power Rangers. Only one costumed hero even shows up. This footage ends up being adapted much later in the season for a completely unrelated episode. Strangely enough though, this opener has the same issue that Zeo does, in that it doesn't feel like a whole lot happens. What's here is more interesting to look at than Rita and Zed slowly escaping. The action here is top-notch, from dogfighting to vine swinging to disembodied arms to being swept away by a river. The only issue I have is that I wish any of this was being used to get to know the characters. Putting them into these desperate situations seems to be the perfect opportunity to show us who they are. But the show doesn't really do that. Goro comes across as generic leader guy. Shohei kinda seems to be giving the commands to the rest, but frankly it's not something I noticed the first time I watched, because they all just kinda blend together as generic people in flight suits. Momo is the only one who stands out at all, and that's just because she screams so much that even the wind wants to get involved. At first I figured this was setting up Judy as the tomboy and Momo as the girly girl, which is pretty generic, but at least it's something to distinguish them. Frankly though, having seen the whole series, I can now say this doesn't actually carry through anywhere. Because of that, after a while, all the cool action just comes across as a stunt performer demo reel instead of an actual story. Goro coming in to save the others as O-Red serves as a good punctuation to end the first part on. It's always cool to see someone walking in front of an explosion. Sailor Moon does it better though. The second episode is where these respective series start to dovetail a bit more. After all, this is the episode in both series where the heroes get their powers. Well, you know, except for Goro, who already has his, but that's a much smaller discrepancy to work around. In both cases, we get introduced to the heroes' respective bases of operation. Ohranger attempts to give their command base a sense of military scope by seemingly filming some of this in a real office building. Granted, in the series proper, most of their time will be spent in a singular room that is clearly a set, but it's still a cool-looking command post. Power Rangers makes a better impression through continuity. The power chamber is such a needed upgrade from the Mighty Morphin Command Center. I'll always love it, but it's clear it existed within its context as a low-budget production, a minimalist design with a black starfield curtain. The power chamber looks much more high-tech, and it pays homage to its history by putting the Mighty Morphin costumes in display cases. I like the Ohranger command room, but it looks pretty bland in comparison to the power chamber. Kinda weird though that Alpha and Zordon were able to put together a whole new base of operations in a matter of minutes. Oh, but they didn't!
The power chamber has always been here.
When it's always been here but was written this year, that's a retcon. Well, that's what they say in the first episode, but in part 2, that disappears as quickly as Zordon's funeral.
Alpha has been working on it for months.
Sure, Jan.
The Zeo crystal doesn't have to be explained given that it had been introduced the previous season. Over in Ohranger, Chief Miura explains that he has harnessed an ancient natural energy, Chouriki, that existed from a civilization predating continental drift, in order to create the Ohranger powers. The 4 rookies have to stand in front of their ancient artifacts to receive their power-ups, and this is the scene that has the most direct correlation in Power Rangers. It is interesting though that the tones are completely different. In Zeo, this is a celebratory moment of graduating from the Power Rangers of old into more powerful powers. In Ohranger, this is intimidating, scary. There's an element of body horror here, as the characters absorb this energy they really don't understand. Both of them are good, just for totally different reasons. If they were to be swapped, they wouldn't really fit their respective shows, especially in the case of Power Rangers Zeo. Most of these characters know what it's like to be Power Rangers, so it wouldn't make logical sense for them to be freaked out. And this is the moment where, at long last, they triumph over the destruction of their old powers. Of course this is something to celebrate. One other thing Zeo has to deal with that Ohranger doesn't is that Power Rangers has 6 characters, while there are currently only 5 Ohrangers to slot them into. Seasons 2 and 3 had that problem too, and got around it by not using those Sentai teams. But this year they are, so somebody has to go. And that would be Billy, who elects to step down in order to be the team's technical advisor. I'm not entirely sure how David Yost felt about this. I know he said he faced a lot of homophobia that ultimately resulted in his leaving the show entirely, among which he was supposedly told he didn't deserve to be a superhero. He certainly didn't get the kind of media exposure in this role that he was previously getting as an actual Power Ranger. And who knows if he was expected to, say, take a pay cut. Because of all of that, being written out of the action could very well have sucked for him. But regarding the story, I've always thought this was so cool. As a kid, I felt this was a neat sense of progression and growth. And the story had done a good job building to this moment. As the dialogue states, this doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the role he'd been forced into during the Alien Rangers storyline, and it's a job he'd always taken to a degree ever since Season 1. It makes perfect sense that Billy, through necessity, would find a new direction that he's truly passionate about. It's the best character moment of both of these series' introductions. Admittedly, it has a built-in advantage over Ohranger of having 3 seasons worth of story to build off of. On the other hand, this has the added middle finger to logic of having the most experienced Power Ranger step down in favor of someone who has literally no experience, who I don't even think understands this time period, and who was forced to wear a really terrible wig in this shot. I don't know, Tanya's her own can of worms, and I don't even have time to get into that today. Both episodes end with both teams having their first team fight against the enemy. For Ohranger, this involves stopping a city invasion and destroying the robot doing it. They get to save a bus full of kindergartners. Yes, that old chestnut again. They get to show off their weapons. Or, well, they at least get to swing them around in the general direction of a monster. They get to show off their Olé pose, and the children get to praise them by name, even though I don't know how these kids would know what an Ohranger is. It's a solid first impression. Power Rangers doesn't use any of this, opting instead to film their own fight scene. I'm not entirely sure why. Obviously, they'd have to cut around the Japanese actors, but that doesn't seem too hard to do. I think with all the other plots circling around, there just wasn't time to work a full-scale invasion into this. Or maybe the show didn't want to make things that intense. Heck, I know it's standard by now, but I skipped seasons 2 and 3, so for me it's nice to see that Power Rangers actually has the capability now of shooting their own transformed fight sequences. They've come a long way since this. Still, this is a pretty weak fight after the 2-part build-up. It's fine as far as fights go, but this seems more like the kind of second act teenagers versus putties fight that was a staple of season 1. It's entertaining, but it hardly seems like high enough stakes to end an episode on. The Rangers fight a few minions and then said minions take off. It doesn't leave a good first impression for either the Rangers or the Machine Empire. Just like with the transformation sequences though, the ending of the respective fights tie into the tone. Even though it's a bit of a letdown, the Power Rangers version feels triumphant. They won!
We're back, guys! Power Rangers Zeo!
Over in Ohranger though, there continues to be the thread of uncertainty and body horror. The triumphant heroes de-transform only to collapse in a heap, their stamina completely and suddenly drained. Even the experienced Goro is sweating profusely. He informs his teammates that becoming Ohrangers is very taxing on the body, and they can only use the power sparingly. Ooh, that's exciting! I can't wait to see where that goes! Spoilers. It doesn't go anywhere. Thanks for getting my hopes up. So if you're new here, this is the part where I decide which show is the winner. I use a system where I judge based on 3 categories: story, characters, and action. Whichever show has the most wins, wins. It's pretty simple. Story is going to be difficult because the stories are both extremely similar and radically different. Ohrangers does a better job of introducing the villains by way of the scale of the threat. Power Rangers doesn't really have anything like that, but does effectively communicate the threat of the Machine Empire by showing them effortlessly scaring off the villains that have been plaguing the heroes for 3 seasons. Both shows feel a bit meandering in places, but Power Rangers makes up for it by having a lot going on. Rita and Zed kinda steal the show, which seems a bit off point, but it is a fitting farewell, for now, to the show's original legacy. Just barely, but I'm going to award this to Power Rangers. Characters is a bit easier for me to deal with. Frankly, neither show does a great job with its leads. I tend to agree with Linkara that the mighty Morphin team began to blend into genericism after the departure of Jason, Zack, and Trini. This episode is really no exception to that, and given the advantage of attrition this has over Ohranger, it makes that feel all the more damning here. Still, the Ohrangers display next to no characterization either. One could argue that Power Rangers doesn't have to introduce its characters, except for Tanya, because we already know them. Ohranger has no excuse. Ultimately though, the scene with Billy shifting into a new role is enough to award Power Rangers the win. Action is even easier. Power Rangers does a good job with what it has, creating a convincing enough blend of stock and original footage to create a battle on the moon. But even though I don't think Ohranger's action is used in much service to the story or characters, taken on its own, I can't deny it's much more impressive in both episodes. Ohranger wins. But that still means that Power Rangers Zeo wins enough categories to triumph in this first match. So that's it! We're back, baby! I hope you liked this first installment of Zeo. I can't wait to get down to the nitty-gritty of comparing these stories, especially when Power Rangers starts using Ohranger footage in earnest. I spent the holiday watching both series, and I can already tell you I have a lot to say. Thank you for watching. I hope you join me next time. Check out Mighty Morphin Zyurangers if you haven't already, or even if you have. And if you can, help support the channel through Patreon so you can join this list of happy people. I hope they're happy. I do my best. It's a lot of responsibility. I'll see you next time.